Hey everybody, happy Monday, and are you ready for KubeCon? Well, you will be in a minute. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Today's edition of Techstrong Gang is going to have some of our usual stars, starting with Mitch Ashley. Mitch, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Also joined by Kate Scarcella and Jack Poller, who are going to lend their insights into all kinds of fun stuff. But first, we're going to start with, what's going on with Cloud Native? Because not only did we host a Cloud Native Now event last week, but KubeCon's coming up in a week or so, and we have some articles over on Cloud Native Now talking about how maybe AI is going to drive more people to build cloud native applications because, maybe it'll get easier. But Mitch, I know you were at the Cloud Native Now event and you gave a presentation there. What's your overall assessment right now? Where are we on this march to cloud native?
Well, we're all watching this like an F1 race, and we're sitting at one corner, right? And kind of see it zoom by for a minute, and they're like, okay, what's happening to the next lap? It just goes so fast. The market is starting to make the next shift, and this is the very leading edge of it, where you see vendors that are that are introducing um, agent control planes and management of multiple agents doing development work, coding agents. And there's a great article that we had on Cloud Native Now that also tied this in. I think it was Nathan Eddy that wrote it. Really good perspective on it. But I think what we're seeing, and it's not just there, but it's mostly on kind of the developer front end. And then we see it with code reviews. We see some security guardrails starting to be implemented. Of course, GitHub had their Universe conference last week and made big announcements about Agent HQ, and are trying to be sort of the neutral platform to bring your agents, bring your model, we'll run it on our control plane, et cetera. Cursor came out with their own kind of similar, we have our own coding model called Compose, and we also will help you run multiple agents in parallel. OpenAI came out with a vulnerability repair capability within their model. So you're starting to see the vendors sort of try to take it up to the next level. And I think it's a lot of it's just a race for the ground, right? Everybody wants to plant the flag, and while the Oklahoma rush is going on.
Kate, I don't think it's any secret that building these apps is hard and deploying them on Kubernetes isn't always a joy. But do you think, or do we have hopes that maybe AI agents will make this easier and more accessible, and maybe we will build more of these applications faster? What do you say?
I personally think, yes, we need to embrace this technology. We need to, of course, put some sort of guardrails, which presently we don't have a lot of guardrails around that. But absolutely, I think that we need to embrace this technology and we need to understand it so that we're able to start to do a better job at securing it. But yes.
All right. Jack, any thoughts here? Do you hope that this comes about, or do you think that this is just going to be more trouble than it's worth?
I don't think it's more trouble than it's worth. What I'm trying to understand is how much of the effort is being driven by AI improving the developer's life, and or AI or the end user application that the developer is building, right? And I think right now we're sort of seeing a lot of focus on developer activities and how do we improve the developer activity, and hopefully as a result the quality of the code they output, and more importantly from my perspective the security of the code they output. I think it's still going to be a while before we get to the point where they're able to really embed AI, and particularly agentic AI, into the final applications.
We'll see. I think there's two things to unwrap there, and I'll go to Mitch for the first one. I think most of the AI applications that people are building these days run on Kubernetes, and I think most of them are cloud native by definition because, they're so large that there's no other way to kind of get after this thing other than to break it up into a bunch of microservices. So do you think that as that occurs, that just naturally pulls more people into building cloud native applications per Jack's point?
Well, first of all, we have some data in my research from buyers that indicates it says AI is the number one workload that they're working to put onto Kubernetes. But the point of it is actually that everything's going on Kubernetes, cloud native applications, but everything else too, databases, you name it. It's the workload platform now, kind of just above the operating system by default. To your point about cloud native applications, there's a sort of a natural affinity between microservices and agents. They kind of look a little similar, but they don't function the same way. But if you can imagine, a group of agents doing different tasks, a part of completing some process, just like a group of microservices do. Now, are those agents running under Kubernetes themselves? Are they running in a different control plane, like in an agent HQ or something like that? Is a different story that we'll see how that shakes out. But I got to believe underlying all of it, there will be Kubernetes there. And I think we'll see this real mix of cloud native microservices and sitting right beside them, agents that are doing some workloads. Increasingly, to Jack's point, it's not like turn the page and it's all agents now. It's going to slowly be put into production over time.
Kate, I'm trying to figure this one out. Are people just going to take their legacy stuff and just toss it out the window and deploy something new that feels like a cloud native microservices application? Or will they try to maybe use AI to take those applications apart and peel them off into a set of microservices that, might take them a few years to do, but they're going to keep the core app in place? Or is it just time to get rid of this stuff?
Well, from previous podcasts, you probably have heard me say, yes, we need just to get rid of it. That's my own personal opinion. Because sometimes it takes a heck of, it's like if you think about doing a project in your home, it can sometimes take on, if you're trying to save all these, items, it's painful. Sometimes it's just better just to take the wrecking ball, not to the White House, but in other situations, in this case, it's really, I believe that it's built on blocks that perhaps that is not secure. We're getting some new areas that we can really do this right. And I think to do this right, we need to think differently and we need to put it in place and build the right trust frameworks around it. I think when we're building this now, let's do the right foundation. We know what's wrong. We've seen it. Let's do this right. So, yeah.
Mitch, do you agree with that? Because a lot of the legacy applications were written by people who I hope are now sitting on a beach somewhere, probably laughing their asses off. And none of this stuff was documented. And I don't think AI is going to actually go in and maybe fully document all those things. So why not just start over?
Well, my one axiom I've come to agree with or put together part of my career is no technology ever actually dies. It's all still out there in somewhere, some form, someday. And we say, hey, that stuff, the old ISAM and the old IBM databases, those things will go away. It's all going to be relational. No, they're out there too. But I think what you're talking about that you were asking, Kate, is there are efforts to specialize AI to help you modernize the applications, not just virtualization of it, but actually the app itself. And in my experience in my career is you rarely wholesale replace a whole application. That's usually a career-ending move. You decide a different strategy. And so, for example, IBM has something they call Project Bob. I call it Bob's your uncle. Now it's Bob's your coding agent. But its specialty is understanding and help you modernize code base. The big issue for modernizing today is there's so much Java out there and trying to maintain consistency with new versions of Java. There's a lot of code to update. So one of the things I did earlier in my career is about 10 years ago is I had a monolith application that we really wanted to do something with. But the people who built it were on the beach, right? And they were not coming back. We could not bring them back. So we actually carved out a part of it, a small part of it, because we didn't understand most of the app, and then rebuilt that in a way that then we could actually with microservices and Kubernetes, and then we could enhance it and do that kind of thing. I think AI will help us speed those kinds of things up. So you may peel off part of an app and say, great, first of all, let's understand it, because nobody can understand that code anymore. Nobody knows it. AI will help us with that too.
The only thing I'll add is, working for IBM from 1999 into 2000, remember the whole Y2K thing?
Oh,
Do
yes.
you know, do you know that we actually would shut down mainframes? And if we didn't get a call, we'd be like, okay, we're good. And that's how we basically went through getting rid of things that were no longer needed. I mean, it sounds crazy that we did it like that, but
Sounds like
sometimes
streaming services at my house. No, kids haven't called yet, so I guess nobody uses that anymore.
True too. And I think microservices are similar. If you turn those off, people go, "Oh, I guess we're not using that one anymore either," right? So same thing applies. Jared, if the security people had a vote in this, where would they vote? Would they vote for trashing the legacy code and just starting over again? And maybe this time building security in from the beginning? What do you say?
Well, I think most security people would actually be for trashing the existing code and not starting over again, because we want to reduce the attack surface. But since not
Thank you,
starting
Jack.
over
Thank you.
it's not an option, we have to do something. I think security people would really like to start with security by design, right? Is if you're going to do something, don't bolt on security after the fact. Think about security as you're architecting and designing the thing. And, that's true whether you're re-architecting it or redesigning it from scratch, or, hey, we need to make this modification. If we're going to make this modification, how are we going to secure it, right? And, I don't know. I can't beat that drum loud enough, right? Think about security.
I mean, Jack, think about the market. If some model maker, some product maker came out with, I call it security OG, at the point of origin, right?
Right.
Where we create the code, we combine it with other things, we configure it, we set up the environment using AI. If a company came out with that and really made some big progress, man, talk about it. That would be the kind of the golden egg that the goose laid.
It would be. And I think, as we think about AI and AI in the Kubernetes environment, it is very easy for us to conflate security and safety, right? And I want to make that distinction. When we think about AI in the world, safety to me is all about things like, does the AI follow your guardrails and prevent you from, can you force the AI to tell you how to build a bomb when the AI is there as a coding agent? That's safety. And security is really about, how does it interact with the rest of the world? Can somebody exploit it to attack your environment, which are sort of two separate things? Or is it, expanding your attack surface? In the Kubernetes environment, when we're using AI in terms of coding assistance and how do we accelerate our development process, there's a tremendous amount of advantage we get, but we also should think about how do we use that AI to improve our security, to reduce the attack surface at the same time. And that's really, I think, where we can, companies that think about it that way and look at it and say, this AI that's going to be a coding assistant its prime directive is always going to be to generate secure code, or to analyze your code that you've created for security, as well as just for traditional, what we call bugs, right? And I think if you're developing tools for the developers that help them security, which is a very complex and hard to understand topic, then you're going to be, you'll have a winner on your hands.
What's interesting, Jack, is you brought up when you started to speak about safety and security, which is definitely an OT position, operational technology position. And traditionally, from an IT perspective, we were always on the, CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that going forward, we are thinking more from a critical infrastructure point of view, from safety and security. And I think that that's important as we move forward. If we were to put that type of thought process in our heads as we define this path.
Well, and I like your concept of the OT versus the IT, right, in a different perspective. And I actually think we need to take it one step further, and we need to think about everything in terms of the benefits and risks to the business overall. So from a risk to the business, security is very, very important. But if you're developing an application that includes an LLM or an agent of some form or another, then the safety aspects is also critical. The classic case we all sort of hear about in the press is the AI agent that promised free flights to somebody when it should not have, right? And that's the safety aspect of it. It wasn't a security issue. The user of the LLM didn't exploit it incorrectly, just the LLM gave the wrong answers. But that's still a risk to the company, both a financial risk, a reputational risk, possibly compliance risk, all of those types of things. So as we make it easier for developers to include AI capabilities, particularly AI agents, which have free reign to wander around through all the data of a company, safety and security become more and more of a concern as opposed to basic functionality and bugs, at least in my opinion.
Here's my whole problem with the modernization storyline. And Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically, before AI, it was, we're going to come in and modernize your app, and here's these 5 really bright people that are going to do it. And then, when the day came, the bus showed up, and about 50 graduate students moved in for about a year or more and basically crashed your house. And now we're saying, progress, it's great. Those same students are going to show up, and they're only going to stay for 6 months because of AI. It just doesn't sound very appealing.
Believe it or not, I was one of those graduate students showed up at a bank. We're going to rewrite all your banking systems. And we did, but it's pretty amazing. It is a familiar model. Maybe it's not, 50 graduate students. Maybe it's 10 of them and, a seasoned Kate or Jack or you or somebody, directing that knows the domain. And that's what we're looking at. I mean, I think that's what people expect to happen. It's not necessarily a great thing for people starting their career, but also I think there's a path for them too. It isn't just the indentured servant approach that I took through the consulting companies.
There you go. All right, folks, I'm going to leave this one here. We will be at KubeCon. We'll be on the show floor, so come on by and say hello at the very least. And also, there's an article by Alan Schimmel over on Cloud Native Now talking about all the great things that are happening at KubeCon. So you should check that out because, well, there's just a lot to do down in Atlanta, and we look forward to being there. And also, by all means, if you can't make KubeCon or if you're just a glutton for the content, check out our little virtual event from last week. It's available online. We expect you to guys get a huge amount of content. Mitch has a whole presentation there that's worth checking out for sure. And we'll be back in a minute.
You've earned it. The spotlight, the responsibility, the weight of teams, companies, and entire industries fall on your shoulders. Lives depend on your decisions, your home life included. At work, you're protected, physically and digitally. Nothing gets through your team without a fight. But in a globally connected world, everyone sees you, including those who mean to cause you and your organization harm. And now home, your sanctuary. Attackers see an opportunity. Your digital front door is wide open. And what compromises your home can breach your boardroom. Because the devil's greatest trick isn't targeting your workplace firewall. It's convincing you that your personal life isn't at risk. Black Cloak. Digital executive protection. Defending the new attack surface. Your personal life.
Hey, folks, we're back and we're going to have a little chat about cloud outages again because now it's Microsoft's turn. First it was AWS and then Microsoft had an outage, and maybe these things are just going to become regular routines and we got to figure out how to learn to live with all this stuff. But Kate, what's your take on what's going on here? Is this just going to be something that we have to live with because, well, these things are not too big to fail, and they have some sort of single point of failure in them, and we just gonna randomly discover this from time to time.
Well, so first, just to review, there was an 8-hour Azure outage this week, knocked out services worldwide, which we all know. And as you said about AWS, same thing. What I continue to think about is I come to hate the word, and even being the cybersecurity person that I am, in resilient. And I've thought about, why do I hate this word? So it just takes me back to the beginning of, we used to talk about 5 nines. If we were to think about building our cloud in a 5 9 more from a redundancy framework mindset, I wonder if it would change us away from the idea of resilience. And it sounds crazy, like we're talking about redundancy, resilience, but I do think that if I think about 5 nines, I notice in my life, typically, I have a backup to a backup to a backup. And it seems to be across the board. It happens to me personally as well. I'm like, oh, I have a backup and I have a backup. You know, that's the problem when we look at cloud. When we look at cloud, we don't think of redundancy. I think we think, as we program, oh, it's redundant because it's in the cloud, but it isn't. And we see that with both, big cloud. And I know I've sort of gone off script here, but it's just this, morning type of idea of, what are we doing? And when we think about resilience, we can't just think cloud, like cloud is our resilience. It isn't. We have to think of it from a redundancy perspective. We have to think, if east part goes down, why do we not have it globally in such a way that if one part of this goes down, it's going to be somewhere else? We should be doing 5 nines and not think of this from a resilient perspective. So that's my take.
Kate, it kind of reminds me of CrowdStrike, where pushing out a change, which was apparently some configuration change, is what caused this in the content distribution. The whole staging of rolling it out, right? Push it all out at once. I don't know how this was rolled out, but usually those are the circuit breakers, right? That like trip, like, well, wait a minute, these didn't come up, or it worked fine at 3, but now we put on 30 and it's not working anymore. So something in that, it's good to say we want it to be resilient, and also, of course, backup and redundancy, but also it's sort of like, don't change everything. Don't paint your whole house until you've looked at what color you're going to use, right?
I think, Jack, to Kate's point, those extra 9s in that 5 9 equation are friggin' expensive. And I think people know that. And one of the reasons that things are not as resilient as they should be is people don't want to pay for it. It's just, the level of redundancy, the backup, the ability to switch networks on a dime is just get out all pricey. And people look at that and they go, that's nice, but I'll take the risk. And if it goes down, somebody will yell at me later, but I don't have the budget for 5 9. So how do we make this whole thing affordable?
Well, I think that's actually the root cause, and the reason we went to the cloud and we've forgotten what our life was like before the cloud is that maintaining 5 nines on our own infrastructure is very expensive, right? It's much more expensive than relying on the cloud service providers who are able to distribute that cost across their thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of customers. In the days before we had the cloud, or the cloud was so prevalent, all the services used to be down all the time. And there's this wonderful site, Down Detector. And if you look at it, you can see who's up and who's down. And we don't talk about that anymore because, for the most part, people don't go down. This is a very, very rare situation, right? I mean, when's the last time we've had a major outage like this? It's been a couple of years. So I think people lose a little bit of perspective and think about it as, when it goes down, a lot of services go down. But on the other hand, how many of those services did maintain 5 9s or 4 9s, or even 3 9s or 2 9s before then, right? There were a lot of services around that we relied on that were 95% uptime, not 99% uptime. And that would be down for multiple outages over the course of a year. So distributing that cost, through the cloud service providers, I think is how we ameliorated the issue.
But you can program for it to be distributed, right? Not to just show up in, you know, I mean, yes, you're right. And cost absolutely was a factor. And I think though that, and one of the things that we saw with CrowdStrike is that the cost becomes a human cost, and it matters. We have to understand, especially as AI becomes, augmenting humans, that the cost is no longer a financial cost. It's actually human cost. And this matters. And so when we think about, we have to think, the developers have to think that the way that we distribute across cloud and even having multi-cloud, it becomes important. And it's not, I mean, is it that expensive? I mean, I honestly, from a multi-cloud perspective, is it that 5 nines? Yes, that was extremely expensive, but is multi-cloud expensive? I don't know. I'm asking.
I think. Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say again, that's sort of, there's the human cost involved in that, is architecting your environment to span across 2 different cloud service providers is actually fairly challenging, right? If, there are many organizations that are multi-cloud, but they have every single app is single cloud, right? They might have something in AWS and in Google and in Azure and in Oracle and they're spread across all of that. But most applications are monolithic across a single cloud because there's enough differences between the clouds and there's not a universal API and not a universal interfaces for this stuff. So becomes very challenging to build an app to make a single app resilient because it spans clouds.
And the only other question, I'm sorry, that I would have then is when we used to architect for 5 nines or whatever, we used to have data centers in different sites, especially in Florida, being hit by hurricanes and et cetera. Why don't they just have like a backup ready to go? Like IBM even used to offer that as a service, like a
hot spare.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, my understanding is on these particular issues, the network routing, the network information was the cause of the failure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had another location you could switch to, it was dependent on being able to get the network information correctly. And because that part of it wasn't working, then you can't switch to whatever your alternate site is, right? It becomes very, very difficult to engineer out every single point of failure in the system.
Yeah.
It's always the network guy's fault at the end of the day.
I think that is not the software developers.
I didn't say that.
I'll tell them all at Network Field Day this week. So yeah, they'll be happy to hear that, Mike.
So Mitch, which is the better situation for an IT person, right? So to Jack's point, right? So we had things on premise and they probably crashed more often than they do in the cloud, but not everybody, the employees knew it, but the whole world didn't know it. And now I have a cloud scenario where it doesn't crash as often, but when it does, the whole world knows it. So which one do I want to have?
Well, it's kind of like when the air traffic control system goes down and now every plane is, trying to figure out how to get where they need to go. It's that level of an outage when you have a big outage. I can remember the day of pick your application. The invoice processing system's down again. It's down again. The 4th time today. They're trying to get it back up and figure out what's going on with it. Those don't happen much to Jack's point. Like they used to. And I think it's because we're architecting systems better, building in more redundancy, not relying as monolithic of code. But from my standpoint, I was happy to move it out of my own data center and put it in the cloud. And part of it is just to deploy networks in co-locations and in central offices and service providers. So I was pretty comfortable with it. But, the thought of okay, the air conditioners, the chiller's got a problem. Do I really want to mess with that? Is that what life is about? Is that what I got a CS degree for? Is the freaking chiller to keep the computer room cold? No. So, to me, I think it's a blessing not to have it on site when you can do that. Doesn't mean there aren't pains moving up to the cloud too, but you have a lot more flexibility. You have less control, but you have a lot more flexibility of what you can do.
Kate, is there a certain amount of comfort to be taken in the fact that when it does happen, it happens to everybody all at once and there's lots of misery to go around?
I guess the adage, right? Misery loves company. So we'll go with that.
We'll see how it goes. Jack, just one question here about the cost of all this stuff. I mean, do you think that it's that the providers haven't figured out a way to deliver that capability of 5 nines in a way that's cost effective, or is it just that the IT people and the apps folks don't really want to pay for it, even though they haven't figured out that maybe the cost of downtime far exceeds the cost of that extra capability, especially for certain applications that are driving revenue?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, but I'll go back to what Kate said in, I think, the previous segment about the human cost, right? And part of the challenge here is that we can build as much redundancy into a system as we want, and we can spend as much money as we want, but at some point, a human's going to trip over a cable and knock out the power to everything. And that's really hard to avoid that, right? And so, I think we're approaching the point of diminishing returns. We can spend infinitely large amounts of money to approach 6 nines or 7 nines, and the ROI of that investment is very, very small, if anything. And that's where we are today. I mean, as I said, there was a point where, and we forget now, but there was a point when failures were so common that we had custom failure pages that became memes. Does everybody remember the Twitter fail whale? Right. I mean, their failures were so often that you had a graphic that you designed specifically for your failure case. Nobody does that anymore. So I think we're at the point where we've gotten, we've spent what we believe is the appropriate amount of money for the appropriate reliability and resiliency.
From a customer of those services perspective, what gets concerning is this is the third failure by fill in the blank, this vendor, in the last 30 days or last 60, 90 days. Then I'm starting to get concerned, right? What's going on here? Do they have their act together? But the fact that they are rare and aren't service affecting to what you run, this says they do a pretty darn good job at it.
The only thing that I'd like to add is that the AWS outage happened. It was an East Coast outage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that should be rectifiable, meaning, not everyone should. Like if I had to develop whatever, I wouldn't go to AWS East because the last 2 times it was AWS East. Or make it multi-cloud in that. I mean, I think there's a checkbox, if I'm wrong, that you can just, multi-cloud that. And so that, I think we're not blaming the network people. So Mitch, you're going to be off the hook, and we're going to be blaming the developers on that one. So
take it to GCP in Iowa. There you go.
There you go. I like it.
All right. I think we have some agreement here. I think, we need resiliency. It would be nice if it was cheaper, but right now it's a little bit expensive. So you got to figure out whether it's worth it for your application. And if it's not, suck it up, Buttercup. We'll be back in a minute.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back in this next segment. I think personally I found it fascinating, but the bad guys have figured out how to avoid the takedown. So I don't know if you've been watching some of these things, but law enforcement officials around the world have been kind of taking down servers in an Elliott Ness kind of fashion. They're short of actually having the cameras on hand, but they basically break into these warehouses and take an axe to the beer barrels, and then they grab all the servers, and away they go, and it makes for great theater. But Jack, turns out the bad guys are getting smart and using something called blockchain and EtherHiding. Please explain.
Well, this has got to be the most diabolically evil case of hide in plain sight I've ever seen or heard of. And the bad guys are basically using a feature of blockchain called contracts, software contracts, where a blockchain is basically an immutable ledger. Everything that gets stored on the blockchain is uncorruptible. You can't be modified, except in very specific use cases, which we'll get into in a moment. And everything is it can be seen and accessed publicly. And most importantly, the blockchain is distributed. It exists on millions of computers across the world. So the law enforcement guys can't go in, crash the doors, grab the server, because that thing on the blockchain, that piece of data, is replicated everywhere across the world. And so they'd have to subpoena and grab millions or billions of computers, which is just never going to happen. Now, what the bad guys are doing is they're taking advantage of something called a smart contract, which includes in it a data field or a set of data fields. And that smart contract, the data fields in the contract itself can be modified through an API. And the bad guys basically corrupt a machine, and then once they have the initial compromise, they're able to go and fetch their code that exists in the data field of the blockchain. So they can modify that code and update it and change it as they want, and therefore use the blockchain as a distributed repository for their malware, which is really evil. And it's very, very hard to get rid of. And it is very hard to detect because they're not usually using the usual methods of command and control servers to get to this.
Mm-hmm. So, Kate, do you think this will become kind of the standard setup for these guys? I think it's both, it's two North Korean groups that kind of pioneered this thing. And but everybody else is going to look up and go, well, thanks for the notes, and crib it, and away they go.
Absolutely. From a cybersecurity perspective, and it's not just because, Jack is right in front of my face, but I will say that this article that he wrote is, I would say, is one of the most important articles. And I'm, very serious here when it comes to cybersecurity moving forward. Like, this is something cybersecurity people, architects, engineers really need to think about, because this methodology moving forward highlights this distributed architecture, which is going to be very important for us moving as we grow. But absolutely, 100%, everything that Jack wrote in this article is a blueprint on what's happening and what we need to do, and how do we start to fight this specifically. So great job, Jack, and really, it's phenomenal.
Mitch, what's your take on this from a DevSecOps perspective? Because, as Jack noted in his article, they were targeting WordPress sites initially because, well, you know how great the security is of those WordPress sites. So seems like, a natural distribution vehicle.
Lockdown gold standard, that's for sure. In a way, it's a supply chain attack, right? Just like with SolarWinds attacking the build process and in the software creation DevOps processes. Here, you're doing it in a payload that's going everywhere. to Jack's point, it is everywhere, and you can't get rid of it. You're usually in DevSecOps, you're thinking about application security oftentimes, but I think that's why I said supply chain, because now we're talking about something that we're relying on for other uses, in this case, the blockchain to be the immutable ledger for whatever uses it is, crypto or whatever. And then it's getting hijacked, no pun intended, Jack, by the nation state guys in this case. So you're not going to solve this by scanning your code more often. This is a different kind of problem. And I think most software developers would say, I don't even know what you're talking about. I know what you mean. Using an API to get to something when it's, when it's down, I get, but they're not blockchain experts. So it's really a tricky problem. I'm not sure how we solve this.
Jack, what are we supposed to do about all this?
Well, I think there's sort of one silver lining here is that while the code repository that the bad guys are using, they're essentially treating the blockchain as a code repository. And that is a distributed environment, but there is some centralization involved in their accessing and changing that repository. So from a global perspective, a law enforcement or people searching for the bad guys and what they're doing perspective, there is some hints that we can have to look at it. From a how do we protect our environment from getting infected, we need to start developing new concepts of what our attacker tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, are. And we need to start developing new rule sets and new heuristics to see when people are going to the blockchain and trying to understand what is legitimate activity from our, say, a corporate environment. How often do people go and access the blockchain, and should they be accessing blockchain stuff? And, and trying to see about that to detect when we've been compromised and how to defend against that, basically.
You think we'll see some security enhanced around the API to get to that smart contract? That seems to me the only way to, getting it in there, you're not going to prevent, because people can do it on the blockchain themselves. But whether some process on your server is now accessing that API, should it be? What's it using it for? And no, I don't know what that is. So, lock it out.
I think we'll see that. And it will also maybe, if the people developing, the blockchain owners, the Ethereums and the Bitcoin, whoever it is, if they have some global moral concepts, then maybe they will start trying to figure out how they can detect bad people from using their environment. But a lot of those environments, their whole concept is anonymity and privacy, and we don't care what happens on the blockchain, is because it has legitimate uses as well as illegitimate uses. So it's, that's the real challenge. And, we have seen similar attempts at hiding activity, say through DNS, where people have used DNS to exfiltrate data in a DNS query. And again, it's from a defender point of view, it's trying to figure out what does legitimate uses of this technology look like versus illegitimate uses, and how can we differentiate between the two. And this may be a case where AI can help us. I don't know. But, it's becomes, it's essentially, like I said, it's hiding in plain sight. So how do you differentiate the legitimate from the illegitimate? It's a challenge.
I think, as a person who, developed, worked with SOCs, security operations centers, I would say we could look at the chain telemetry and feeding it into threat intel feeds. So that would be one way that I would look at it. Just FYI.
10 p.m. Where's your blockchain been?
Yeah.
All right. Folks, I think we're going to leave this here. I would just say to everybody, that was sobering. Happy Monday. And that gnawing feeling in the pit of your stomach is definitely not indigestion, but hopefully we'll get smart about all this and fix this sooner than later. Hey, I want to thank everybody for sharing their knowledge and their insights today. As usual, great show, folks. I want to thank you all for spending some time with us once again, and please stay tuned for the rest of the Techstrong TV lineup, which is going to be equally awesome, and we'll see you all tomorrow.